we were elected in 2010 as Labour MPs. You left the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. You were put into the House of Lords by Boris Johnson, of all people, and he gave you a big job in 2020. He made you the advisor to the government on political violence and disruption. You're going to be producing a report on that for the current Prime Minister, and I want those issues that are very live at the moment to be the focus of this interview.
Great.
So can I start by asking you, it is clear that I think most MPs are fearful of their safety. Are they right to be scared?
I'm afraid I think they are right to be deeply cautious about the security threat that they are facing, and the situation has unfortunately worsened, I think, considerably since we were in the House of Commons. There is a level of menace that is felt by many members of Parliament. I mean, let's not forget that we have had two MPs, our friend Joe Cox, Sir David Amos, who have been murdered by extremists, one far right, one violent Islamist in recent years. We've had another sitting MP, Sir Stephen Timms, who was stabbed. There's a fourth who had an assassination attempt thwarted. So the threat is real, and on a day-to-day level, I think MPs are feeling it much more significantly. So the extra level of protection that's been announced by the government this week, it's very welcome, but I think we should take a step back and think that, you know, a lot of this money is clearly going on the kind of close protection that for decades now has really only been needed to be offered to very senior ministers in particular jobs, in particular high-profile roles like the Home Secretary, the Defence Secretary, and now you're actually having a clear need for that to be offered to some members of Parliament facing threats. And we should not be prepared to put up with the level of threat and coercion that represents, yes, to those individuals, but also to our whole democratic system. There is protection that is offered to senior people, and what you were seeing is the expansion of that. I mean, I think realistically, we're not probably going to get to the idea of, you know, a copper outside the home of every MP. The money should follow the threat. We should not be thinking of this in terms of there is a budget and you can't go further than that. But I think what we've also got to do is reset the conversation about what is acceptable in terms of how we discuss issues with members of Parliament and how people get their point of view across. Because I think we've got this wrong, actually, and I say we. I think particularly there has been. My concern is that people that come from our political tradition, we come from the left, we come from the Labour Party. We're all brought up in the tradition of protest, one way or another. I was taken by my mum on C&D marches in the 1980s. You know, we all understand the value of protest, but actually, what is happening a lot certainly in the way that people's homes are being encircled, people's offices being encircled. It's not actually about trying to change people's minds. It's about trying to intimidate them, and that's not okay.
They should be arrested, shouldn't they?
I think
if you are outside a politician's home,
outside the home, I think that's one of the real frustrations. And I welcome what the government did last week when you had Home Office ministers writing to all police forces, just reminding them of the powers that already exist, and some of these were brought in the wake of the animal extremism in the 1990s, and so it worries me that there hasn't been a uniform application. Too often, I think the police at the moment think we don't want to inflame the situation by warning people that unless they move on, they will be arrested. But actually, there also needs to be deterrent in there. People need to know what's acceptable and what crosses the line, and that isn't clear at the moment.
In terms of protests, the war in Gaza has made many people in this country very angry, and there are regular protests, weekly protests in London as a result. Ben Jamal, he's the director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which has organised these weekly protests. And his fear is the debate around MP safety is being used to conflate legitimate forms of peaceful protest with illegitimate and genuine threats to safety.
I mean, one answer to that is to make the protests less threatening, because, I mean, people are not making this up. You can see the level often of intimidation that is intended on this. I mean, I've gone into a defence event recently where I had everyone who ran the gauntlet was being shouted at, screamed at, horrific things said to them, megaphone in their face. And that is not about changing people's minds. Look, the right to protest, the right to debate, the right to get your point across to your Member of Parliament is a foundation of our democracy. But what is happening often at the moment is not that. It's about an implied threat of menace. And a big physical protest is only one way of many ways in which you can get your point across. Actually, I think we need to reset the balance and remind people that if they want to change people's minds, we've got a process of elections to do that, and you can put yourself forward and you can win a majority. And if you can't get a majority of people to agree with you, it's not really an acceptable subject to think you can menace people who are there into doing what you want. And that's what we saw in the House of Commons last week, and that's why a lot of people are thinking, hang on a minute, this isn't right, we need to reset the balance here.
If we imagine a person or organisation who an MP is most at threat from, do you have any insight into that? Is it possible to paint a picture of who we should be worried about, who is being radicalised, who might want to harm our democratically elected politicians?
I would think, a large majority of people who turn up because they feel strongly, but they're not part of any group. They're not part of any organised political movement. But you've got, I think, a significant strand within that, either in the leadership of the organisations or around the extreme edges, a sort of unholy alliance, actually, of the sort of far left protesters and with some alliances now towards Islamist groups. And the term Islamist, I think it's really important to be precise about this. Islamist is not a term for Muslims, it's a term for a particular form of radical Islam, which actually rejects the democratic process, wants to form a caliphate in this country, in other countries. And actually, you do have a conflation within parts of the protest movements that are happening at the moment that we shouldn't be relaxed about, and we should be able to talk about without immediately people confusing that with talking about all Muslims or saying that is that in a knee-jerk way that is Islamophobia, because that will actually hold back the debate that we need to have rather than help it.
I'm just going to put what the current security arrangements are without the 31 million, because there'll be some people who are watching this that says MPs have access to stab vest, portable panic buttons connected to a specialist police hotline, close protection officers at surgeries if they request them, reinforced front doors at their homes. Enough, right? There's enough money spent on this.
Well, there is still a level of threat. And actually, one of the things is that those measures that are apparently now readily available, that hasn't been the experience for many MPs. Actually, I mean, if that has changed now, if the tap is now on again in terms of what is available, that's a good thing. But their experience over the years has actually been, it's been very difficult to get those kind of measures from the authorities. But there is still a level of risk to their personal, even with all of those, even with all the things. But then the wider threat is not necessarily simply, are you at any moment vulnerable to the kind of physical attack that can threaten your life? But it's also, is there a level of menace and viciousness and unpleasantness that can actually change how you might otherwise view a situation, rather than taking into account your view on the matters from listening to all points of view? You've got one really angry group on one side of the debate that you know is going to really get in your face, potentially upset you, whether it happens consciously or not, I think for many people it's like, I just don't want to go there. I mean, otherwise I might have like said something difficult. That I think about my personal view on the Gaza conflict, which I feel I'm elected to, but I mean, is it worth the grief I'm going to get? I'm just going to keep my head down, or I'm not going to challenge a particular way of voting. And that itself is a threat to democracy that we shouldn't be relaxed about.
Final question. So I think you've written the report already. That's waiting to go to the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Any sense of time?
I'm going through what has to be a really intense and short period of stress testing with senior officials, and I'm hoping that very soon after this week I'll be in the position to formally write to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, say, here's my report. I really hope that they write straight back and say, this is really interesting, we'll have a think. In the meantime, publish it, because I'm conscious that these debates are really live. I want the report to be considered by the public as the government is considering it. And look, we don't know when there's going to be a general election, and I want this to be out before that. So hopefully, very soon.
Lord Walney. I mean, it's hard because you're always John Woodcock to me. Lord Walney, thank you very much indeed.